Hey guys, so glad you are here for this episode of the Seeds Storyteller Series with my man, Dr. Brandon Davison-Tracy. I asked him to join us because I get the gift of having him with me to answer all the questions I have about safety for our kids, just the worries and concerns that I have as a mama and as a human being in the state of our world today with the coronavirus and kids being home, and our lives are rather disrupted. So I asked if he would speak into the disruption and bring his wisdom and his perspective and expertise to us. So if you're live with us, feel free to post below any questions you have. I will do my best to look at the comments. If I miss your comment, I will check in with Bran and get back to you in the comment section. We do have a couple questions that folks have sent to us in advance that I'll be getting to. First of all, I just want to say thank you. Welcome.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, Brandon was joking around if we should do this at the beginning.
We didn't want to make
but we didn't want to make
We're married,
fun.
so it's already too late.
We have more than, the 6 feet thing is.
This is not very
not
6 feet. No.
So you guys, listen, before we start, our commitment as a family is really to do whatever we can to kind of pull together as a community and share our gifts, share whatever we can to contribute to what is happening in our world and in our community, and serve each other and love each other well. So Brandon, one of his many gifts is caring for kids. And so this is what he has offered us today. And when he cares for kids, he of course cares for us parents. So yeah. I invite you to share, post below, and reach out to me. Any questions you have, ideas you have for caring for your community, for your family, for the world, so that we can really radically wrap our arms around each other and band together in the midst of a lot of worry and concern. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
I want to say first, I'm just a pediatrician and a dad and a husband. The only advantage I get is that I get to surround myself every day at work with smarter people than me, which you guys don't have as easy access to. So I get the benefit of asking my partners and all the awesome staff that I work with their thoughts and opinions. So I'm echoing a lot of their stuff, to be honest. And so I'll give credit where credit is due. These certainly aren't all my ideas. And also, this is a developing story every hour, right? So some of the stuff we say today may not be true tomorrow, and we may do this more than once, depending on how things are going. So first off, kids ask the best questions anyway.
Always.
I think sometimes they ask the questions that adults are afraid to ask, everything that's out there. So in the last week, I will just pepper you with some of the little things that a lot of kids have asked. So first of all the nomenclature can be confusing. So what SARS is, and SARS, CoV-2 and MERS and COVID-19 and coronavirus. I had a little boy ask me if the pictures on the news were accurate. So those pictures that look like aliens, usually behind anchors, are right. Those are electron microscope views of images, not views, of coronavirus. And of this coronavirus, I'm not certain. But coronaviruses typically are small. They look like a ball. And they do have those little spikes on them. Little protein coats, and so that's why they're called a corona, which is like Latin for crown. So when you look under an electron microscope, those coronaviruses are round with those little kind of spikes all over them. So some of us have been too embarrassed to ask that, but that's why they're called coronaviruses. They all look the same. And most coronaviruses, we've known about coronaviruses for a long time. Most of them can cause a common cold. I bet you most of us have been infected with a coronavirus at one time in our life. This one is a novel coronavirus so novel for other people that are afraid to ask the question, just means it's new. It's new. We didn't know about this one, how this one had mutated from animals and infected humans. And that's not unusual for coronaviruses because they're viruses that initially started in birds. And then it's argued where this one came from, and be bats and etc. But so the terminology that some kids have asked, and some parents have asked me, what makes us different than SARS? What is SARS? I don't understand what coronavirus is versus COVID-19. So it's a little bit of a nomenclature thing. So SARS means severe acute respiratory syndrome. So the first SARS was in around 2003, and that was a bad one. We didn't really experience it much here in the United States. I think there's less than 100 cases. Don't quote me on that, but it was a big deal in Asia. It had a mortality rate of around 10%. We'll talk about how we should talk to our children about mortality rates in a bit. So we'll put a pin in that, because I'm only telling you as parents so you're educated about what coronavirus is. I don't necessarily think talking about mortality rates and death rates with kids, unless they're asking questions, is probably an ideal thing. Because when you talk about numbers to a little kiddo and you say, well, it's only 60 deaths. Or you might be a little bit anxious and go like, now there's 3,000 deaths. That to them, one death, and that's scary. What's 1,000 deaths to a kiddo versus 100,000 or 1,000,000? It's a lot. So you might sometimes caution yourself how you talk about that with kids. If you're watching the news, probably the best thing is to not always have it on and to pick and choose. If they want to watch the news, you probably watch it with them in short spurts. You interpret that for them. You allow them to ask questions and be honest if you don't know, which I have to say to my kids often. I also have to say I have to go ask one of the doctors at work usually. But yeah, I wouldn't make things up. And then we have to, I'm kind of going off on a tangent now, but I'll tell you about the other nomenclature in a second. But we have to model good behavior. And I know that sounds silly, but if we're asking our kids to wash their hands, they need to see us wash our hands. I just touched my face a ton on this video, which is not a very good example. So it's one of those things that we model it. We encourage them to do it. We try to be the best example. We give opportunities for kids to ask questions, because what they're going through right now, they're not in school. So that's a big deal. So they don't get that social interaction. So there's a lot of time at home to be by yourself on your phone, watching the news, on Twitter or Snapchat, escalating fears about like, I can't believe we're at school. Did you hear this? One person died in California, whatever they're saying. It's not awesome if they don't get a check-in with mom and dad, at least on a daily basis, maybe more regular than that. So yeah, okay, there'll be more specific questions about that.
I do have one question specific to washing hands that came from a friend.
Okay.
Do you have any tips and tricks? She was saying it's super crazy difficult to get my kids to observe the protocols of washing their hands and not touching their faces. Do you have any magic ideas? So besides her modeling it, I heard you just say that. Do you have any? What do you say to?
So remember, this is respiratory season. We should be good about washing our hands all the time. So this isn't different than what we would have told you 3 months ago before we knew about coronavirus. With influenza and with rhinovirus and the typical cold viruses, is washing your hands with soap and water, at least 20 seconds. You can sing a song, they would say ABCs, but you can make up a song and be funny about it. And the Purell cleansers are good, but you just can't slap them on. You got to use those for at least 10 or 15 seconds too. But the best thing is modeling the behavior. Certainly don't give any negative feedback for not washing your hands. Like, hey, if I don't see you wash your hands before dinner, then we're not going to get our book read tonight. Or, that's not going to work anyway. Maybe a better thing is to say, hey guys, we're all going to wash our hands. It's a big family time. And you can be corny about it. The kids will rally around it because you're at home with them anyway. And that's probably the first time in a long time we've all been forced to be home. So you can take the opportunity to do funny things. You can make a game around washing our hands, and then we got to make sure we moisturize because we're going to get really dry and cracked, and you're going to have doctor hands. Most doctors' hands are dry and cracked.
Okay, recommendations on moisturizing. Like
anything that's, my big thing is anything that's white, thick, and goopy and doesn't smell. That's really simple, right? So white, thick, and goopy and doesn't smell, or really nice, heavy, clean ointments like Vaseline or Aquaphor, things like that. Some people don't like those because they can stain stuff and make it kind of greasy greasy everywhere. But white, thick, goopy, and doesn't smell is a good one. So that's Eucerin, Cetaphil, Vanicream, and you can just have that right where the dispenser is by the sink.
And for people who have kids, like our kiddo Micah, his hands are so dry. He every so often needs to put on like plastic gloves over the Aquaphor.
Yeah, and that's actually not bad.
So what do you say about
that? So yeah, if kids are going to be washing their hands for the 3 weeks that they're going to be home, or they'll probably be home longer than that, to be honest, they might get really dry and cracked. I didn't even think about this. A lot of the times kids get dry and cracked on the back of their hands because when they dry their hands, they're doing it really quick. They might have washed really good, like they're supposed to, and then they dry really quick like this, and they don't get the back of their hands. So the back of the hands are wet. So that evaporative loss will make them drier. So make sure they dry the back of their hands. And then, you put lotion on, and that's fine. And if they're really dry, you can just goop them with Vaseline or Aquaphor before they go to bed. You can put a sock over them if you can't find gloves, because sometimes those are hard to find. And that's okay. They'll keep their hand integrity good. So going back around the thing I started, which was I got sidetracked, which happens often, is she'll tell you it happens a lot. So with SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. So it was just called SARS in 2003 because it was the first one. And there's around 8,000, 9,000 people in the world that got it. Only 8,000 or 9,000. A little less than 1,000 died. So about mortality rate of around 10%. So the thing about that is that already looks like a more deadly SARS than this one, but this SARS is more infectious. So because this is more infectious is why it's spreading rapidly. That's why our death total has already beaten the first SARS, because the first SARS was not as infectious, more deadly, less infectious. So that's what's making everybody anxious and a little bit fearful. And so SARS-CoV-2 is just severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus, the second one. MERS, which people talk about in the news. One mom asked me about that. That's Middle East respiratory syndrome. So that's just because it was a very similar coronavirus outbreak that was just really located in the Middle East, mostly in Jordan, a little bit in Korea. There was, don't quote me on this, maybe less than 2,000 or 3,000 people, I think. But it had about 1,000 people die. So it was around 30% mortality rate. That was a little different. I won't get into semantics of that. It was more lower respiratory. It did colonize the whole respiratory tree, where SARS we're talking about right now, COVID-19, which by the way, just means coronavirus disease 2019. They isolated it in 2019. So I think they officially isolated it actually December 31st in 2019. So it refers to the year. The pandemic is obviously 2020 and the outbreak is 2020. So 19 doesn't mean anything except that it was the year 2019 is when they isolated it. All the other stuff happened, the outbreak in 2020. So COVID, coronavirus disease 2019 is really what that means. So SARS-CoV-2 is the same as COVID-19. I think that's clear. Is that clear?
Yeah.
That's clear.
So listen, you mentioned Purell a minute ago.
Uh-huh.
So we had one question come in saying, what about the natural cleaners and natural hand sanitizers?
Yeah, we really like natural stuff when we can. So I just kind of defer to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and some really smart researchers who have already studied how to clean coronavirus. And I haven't seen anything with natural cleaners. That doesn't mean they don't work, but it does mean I don't think I would be using those right now until we really know. And so, the nice thing about coronavirus is it's like a lot of coronaviruses. So it's not very it's not very hardy. So what that means is like UV light kills it. So sunlight is awesome. It works. There's a big thing, and we get a lot of discussion. I had this last week with parents talking about certain surfaces of how long it lives on certain surfaces. I just touched my nose. It's a bad example. I do it all the time. So that's all new. So on some plastics and some like stainless steel, they can isolate the virus off those maybe even 2 days or 3 days later. The fact they can isolate it doesn't mean it's infectious then. The virus dies incrementally within 10 minutes. I keep on touching my face as I look here. I'm so sorry, Malachi. You can't help it. I just try to lead by example. I'm not doing a very good job. But so within 10 minutes, it's dying. Within an hour, 2 hours, it's may not be even half of the concentration it was before. So the fact that we can get it off surfaces doesn't always mean it's infectious. So that's one thing to consider. That's still an evolving story. We don't know how much you need to be infected. But like cardboard was a big one when you're getting your Amazon packages. They've been able to isolate coronavirus up to 24 hours after. But most of it's gone. Again, most of it, even if I can isolate it on cardboard 24 hours, doesn't mean it's infectious. But, a guy's coming up to your door delivering Amazon packages, and we're all going to be not going to restaurants and getting stuff delivered to support our local economy. If you just saw him sneeze on the package, I probably wouldn't grab it right away. So you just don't know in transit what happened on that. Copper is a big one for all of you guys that splurged on copper, tables and copper, dining area, kind of cutting, I don't know, seating areas. Yeah, it doesn't live on copper very, very long, like 4 hours. So we don't know why that is. But as far as cleaning goes, good old fashioned bleach and water. It's cheap, it works. If you don't know how to make it, it's real easy. 1 gallon of water, 1/3 of bleach, 1/3 cup of bleach. If you don't know what 1/3 of a cup is, 5 tablespoons. So if you put 5 tablespoons into 1 gallon of water, that's going to kill it. And that works awesome. So I don't know about the natural cleaners until those studies come out, because this is so infectious, I probably wouldn't use them.
Couple questions.
Or use them on
Couple
top.
more questions. Can this virus mutate and become worse than it is now and kill more people?
They can mutate. It's already mutated. That's how it became what it was and what it is right now. It doesn't look like it's mutating right now. It takes a little while for that to happen. But you'd have to ask smarter people than me, probably at the university or Mass General. But it doesn't look like it's mutating right now. It's pretty predictable on what we're seeing as far as illness and who it's affecting, and the disease presentation is pretty consistent. So right now, it doesn't look like it has. Other coronaviruses haven't, like the first SARS and MERS did not mutate and they eventually died out. But could it? Of course, it always could, but it's not happening now.
How about this? What about masks? Are they protective or not? Lots of different opinions out there.
I know there are. So I kind of hit the middle on this one. So they're not protective, generally speaking, unless you have special masks that are for droplets. So like the N95 masks, no one even knew what those were 3 weeks ago. Now we all know what flattening of a curve means, and we all know what social distancing means. We never used those words before. And now you guys all know what N95 masks are. I mean, can you believe we didn't know what those were? I mean, we all did, but now that's in our vernacular. We use it all the time. So right fitted masks that are made for that, yes. General masks, no. You can't put a handkerchief over your mouth. But if it makes you feel better to wear a mask, wear a mask. But what that means is you still have to wash your hands. You still can't touch your face. We worry that people are going to wear masks that aren't protective and think they're immune and just go out to public places and not be responsible for social distancing. And that's not a good idea. So you get this false sense of security when you have a mask on. So if it makes you feel better, wear a mask, but you aren't secure with the mask on. Certain masks are better than others, but it's better to do all the other things, which is distance yourself from people that are sick. You wash your hands, don't touch your face. All that kind of stuff.
Social distancing. Will you talk about, obviously this I think is one, you mentioned at the very beginning, things are morphing and changing, but at this point in the day, as a father and as a pediatrician, what can you share with folks what you are recommending to our family in terms of, going outside to the park, having a friend over, going?
Yeah, remember the kids are at home, and that's unusual for them. So there's some already increased angst, and it just started. Like we're in Colorado here, and this is the first day the kids haven't been at school. So it's going to increase a little bit as the boredom sets in, and there's less things to do, and it's not as novel, and we're sitting around thinking about to do, and they're going to want to do things and have a lot of group of friends over and all that. So number one, there's no limitation going outside. So ride your bike. Remember, the sunlight's awesome.
I was just gonna say, with the sunlight killing it.
Right.
That's awesome.
Ride your bike. Gotta be at the park benches. I still would clean the park benches.
I actually did have one friend ask, what about the playground? So we,
yeah, I mean, well, if it
with the metal.
Well, it's in the sunlight, so it's probably being disinfected by the sun. That's all relative, however. If someone could have just sneezed and hacked who had COVID-19 on that playground. So, if you're pushing your kids in the swing, I would bring some cleaners over. Just be super careful. Just kind of wipe down on the place where they're sitting, where they're touching their hands on the chains. That's not a big deal. I mean, that's easy to bring with you. You can all your cleaning stuff is portable. Just be extra cautious. But I would not go to the playground. And it's an opportunity to do things as a family you might not have had time to do before. So if it's walks around the park, you go outside. You guys in Boulder on a hike yesterday. So that is going to be fun to see what comes of this. There might be patterns that develop as a family. It might be at home saying, listen, we're done with screen time. Remember that puzzle we bought 6 years ago and we haven't done? Let's do a puzzle. Let's bring out those old photos we had from our vacation that we never organized. We always think we have time to do it and we don't do. You now have your kids at home. So modeling that behavior, which means we're not talking about coronavirus ad nauseum. We're not talking about the recent death rate, the recent death toll, and how many people have been diagnosed today, and where we're going to get test kits. And that will grow tiresome for kids and increase anxiety. So we have to model good behavior about how we talk about it amongst ourselves. So yes, I would go outside, and I would not limit any of the play outside. My kids are in the backyard right now. And then having people over, it's still a developing thing. This is common, things are common. So someone might be as likely to have influenza, which I don't want someone to come over to my house who has influenza. So if a kid is sick and has a fever, don't invite them over. And if your kid is sick and has a fever, don't go over to somebody's house. Quarantine yourself. People who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and lots are asymptomatic. Lots, and we're going to figure this out.
Explain what asymptomatic means.
So asymptomatic means I have the virus and I don't feel sick. Like that guy from the Utah Jazz. I read somebody this morning who I think you guys may or may not know. There's a handful of NBA players that have tested positive. None of them are sick. He was actually saying, I could go play a 7-game series right now. I feel good. I can't believe I have it. So that maybe is certainly more typical in younger people. So I do think kids, we're going to maybe figure this out at the very end. It's still mystery why kids aren't getting a severe illness and maybe more asymptomatic than we even thought. Like, we won't know until we can test everybody. So all these numbers we have in front of us right now are artificial. You can't trust any denominator, numerator, and any kind of percentage you're getting off of this, because we just don't know.
So, but what you were saying about kids coming over,
right? You're
saying as long as they don't have a fever.
Yeah. So what we're doing as a family now is, if the kids aren't sick, they can come over. I'm not having 10 kids over, but one at a time. We're having kids come over and practice good hygiene, washing their hands and doing all that. But we might find out in a week, we might find out in 2 weeks, we might find out in a month that, oh my gosh, there were these kids. And I think it's going to happen. Lots of these kids who are asymptomatic that could be spreading it to people. That's true. But for now, we don't know. And also, do they spread it as easily being asymptomatic? Is their viral load, how much virus they have in their body, much different than people who's actually exhibiting symptoms? But it doesn't mean kids don't get it. Kids do get it. It doesn't mean there's not going to be an outlier where kids have a bad outcome. That's going to happen. But it's very rare. Very rare. And to put it in perspective, again, this is not something you probably want to share with your kids. There's 70,000 plus cases in the world and 3,000 plus deaths. In the United States last year, there was 35 million influenza cases and 30 or 40,000 deaths. Last week alone, I think there's 25 pediatric deaths from influenza in the United States. So we just kind of forget that we are very, very lucky to live in a place where we have access to antivirals like treatments for the flu and a vaccine for the flu, but it still happens. So it just happens around us. We don't think about it, but it's around us all the time. If that was happening with coronavirus right now, there would be mass hysteria. But that's not happening right now. We don't understand it, which is the mystery, which makes people anxious. But it's a developing story. But the one of the best advice I can give you is, since flu is still out there, if you haven't got your flu shot, go get flu shot. If you think you are sick, you have respiratory symptoms, your shortness of breath, you have a cough and you have a fever, you need to go to the doctor. Even though there's a lot of telemedicine, and at my job we're experimenting maybe how we can do that. You can't look in an ear. You can't listen to somebody over telemedicine, and it's as likely you might be having an asthma exacerbation or bronchitis or pneumonia, and that could be as serious, if not more serious. But I understand the fear of going to a doctor's office. How am I going to go and not be exposed to COVID-19 when my kid has other stuff? That means you should talk to your physician's office about what they're doing to mitigate that risk. They might be scheduling different, where wells are kind of more child checks, so physical exams are going to be more at a separate time of day and a separate part of the office, and sick kids are coming at another point. Some offices might just be canceling wells for now. If your kiddo is up to date on their vaccines, doesn't have any concerns developmentally or physically, and you have a physical coming up, it's probably okay to cancel it. I would call your doctor's office about that and making sure you can reschedule. We're not going to just forget about it forever, because those are important. But if your kids need vaccines, like you have a 4-year-old, that's a big vaccine visit. I wouldn't miss that vaccine. I wouldn't miss that visit. But maybe you can delay it for a couple of weeks until we understand more. But every office will be different. But the anxiety about getting COVID is probably, it's certainly true, but it certainly doesn't outweigh the risk of other things that were here 3 or 4 months ago and are increasing right now, like any respiratory season. I worry more that we're going to miss flu cases. We're going to have bad outcomes from flu and bronchitis and pneumonia and asthma, because people are going to come to the doc. And our healthcare system is going to be so full, it'll be a bit overwhelmed. We might not even have the space in the room to do that. I haven't heard that talked about a lot, but that's one thing.
We got for some more?
Yeah.
What about once you get COVID-19, can you get it again? Is it like chickenpox, where you... Do we know that yet?
Yeah, we do know that. We don't know. We don't know everything, but there's a few cases. I think there's a young man in China who got coronavirus, and it might be more than a handful, but I know at least one case where a younger person, like in his 30s, had coronavirus, was isolated. 14 days later, had a negative test, and then 5 days after that, had a positive test. And I think he had a bad outcome. So that could be an outlier. We have no idea. We haven't tested enough people yet. Most coronaviruses, you get immunity to once you've had it, which is, if we're testing all of us adults right now, we've had corona before in the past, which is part of a common cold, other coronaviruses, not this one. And then we don't get the other cold again. But there's lots of viruses that cause a common cold. So I think that's probably more of an outlier. But it's not absolute. There's already at least one example.
What about, we have a question here about the peak of the disease. Obviously, you can't know 100%, but what would you say based on all the research you've been doing about the peak? Well,
I would say, boy, there's way smarter people at my work that could answer this question. But let's just go back to, so we're just figuring this out. In the United States, I think our peak is going to be a little slower to manifest itself, because we haven't nationalized this yet, which means other countries, so Italy or Korea, South Korea, or even China, when their government says do this, they do it for the most part. We're here is kind of going state to state to state. It doesn't make a lot of sense that Connecticut and New Jersey and New York are doing something different than California and Washington and Colorado. That doesn't help. That might change this week, where we just have a national plan. You know, all restaurants are closed, all gymnasiums are closed, you know, whatever it's going to be, all schools. And the magic about having, at least in Colorado, I don't know where people are listening from, where our schools are supposed to be open April 6th. I don't know what's magical about April 6th. I don't know what's going to happen differently between now and 3 weeks from now. In fact, if anything, I think the numbers are going to be increasing tremendously by that point. So I've told my kids too, I hope it's April 6th. It's probably not going to be April 6th. So as far as the peak goes, we can just kind of look at what's happening like in Wuhan, right? So they've had all these temporary hospitals set up, and now they're able to take them down. So their peak has hit and things are falling. Again, it's a different country in a different place. I do think as Americans, we don't necessarily like to be told what to do. So we're probably going to break some rules and do our own thing anyway, some of us. It's not always a bad thing, but in this case, it might be. So I think it's going to let things kind of linger a bit longer than it is. So I would say when we talk about this as a practice, think this is probably going to peak at the end of the spring. End of the spring, we're talking like April, May, and still have cases into June and into July. That would not be unusual. Andrew Fauci, he's the smart guy on that, and CNN, or he's everywhere on the news. Talk to him about it. You could probably look him up. But that's what he's saying. Yeah, if that's what he's saying, then he's right. Yeah. But and then we'll probably see it again next year. And we've had patients ask, you know, there's antivirals for herpes and AIDS and HIV and flu. Why can't we use those? They don't work. Although smarter people than me, way smarter people, are working on that stuff right now, seeing if we can like reuse these medications or make tweaks. Medicines, they're doing everything. So from old anti-flu medications that have been shelved, and Ebola medications, and actually HIV meds. Lots and lots of research is going into that right now. That'll probably be developed before a vaccine. Vaccine trials are not quick things. They take a lot of time. I was listening to a podcast that one of my providers that I work with, who's really smart, sent me this weekend from Mass General. And someone was talking about just trying to make animal models for this so we can study it. They were doing that as early as February. I mean, they were trying to make animal models, mice models, so we can get this escalated. So people behind the scenes, before we were taking it super seriously in the United States, were already working on models to try to get vaccines developed. And that's probably what's going to need to happen in order to get rid of this virus. I've heard some epidemiologists say that we need 50% of our population to be infected in order for this to stop. That does not mean 50% are sick. They likely need to be infected with the virus. And we don't know how many people are infected right now in the United States. So for us to say we have 3,000 plus cases is not right. That's how many positive tests we have. I almost think the way you should talk about it is not how many cases we have, it's how many tests that have been positive have come back. That's all about how many tests we have. That will change very shortly because we have more and more tests being delivered and more flexibility in the next days. That changes every 24 hours. Right now, the people that need to be tested are the people that have obviously traveled to an endemic area, the people that have had close contact to someone who has tested positive, which isn't very many right now. So in the United States, how can you have that story? Because there's only been 3,000 plus cases that are positive. So the likelihood of you being around someone who'd been positive in a test is unlikely. That will increase exponentially in the next 10 to 14 days because there'll be more tests available. So right now, just going to your doctor's probably unable to do it, but that's going to change quickly, like literally maybe in days, when private companies like the labs, like LabCorp and Quest here in Colorado, are able to make those tests available. And then that means your doctor can do it and send it off. And those tests don't come back right away. It's not like when you get a rapid strep swab at work or at your doctor's office. It's my work. And you get the result in 7 minutes. That's not how it works. It's
how long are the tests taken?
72 hours usually. Some people have come back in 2 days. I don't know how that's happening, what they said on the news, but it's 3 days. It's a different kind of test. You have to replicate that virus. It's hard to do that. It takes some time. Certainly someone's trying to develop a rapid test right now. I'm certain about it, but that's happening all behind the scenes. Really smart people are trying to develop vaccines. Really smart people are trying to develop treatments. we're using what we already have. The good news is this coronavirus has identical proteins on it and is not a ton different as far as its makeup that the coronaviruses are, or other viruses that are out there. So it should be a relatively straightforward process, straightforward, not easy, and not simple, but a straightforward process to develop a vaccine. But that vaccine is not going to be available next year. That'd be very unlikely. This would be for a 2021 season. So the best thing we can do now is do what we need to during the very beginning of this outbreak, possibly having another outbreak next year in respiratory season. We'll all be a bit more educated about it.
Next year, meaning fall?
Yeah, the next respiratory season, kind of 20 to 21, and we kind of go from there. That's putting the cart before the horse right now.
Okay, a couple questions. So what about the age? We have one person that asked about, according to what's happening in Italy right now, it looks like it's not only affecting elderly, but also younger people. So that means there's an equal number of sick people under the age of 65, under the age and over the age of 65. Same thing. So she's wondering, is it really older people that are more vulnerable, or also younger folks?
No, we don't understand it. And there's really smart people, again, trying to figure that out. There are viruses that have a unique predilection for a more vulnerable population, and especially if they're elderly. So the first SARS was like this. It was like a 60-40 split between infecting elderly versus young people. But this one seems so different. Like literally most of the cases are people 30, 40 and plus years old, like 98%. It does not mean it's zero in little kids. But if you look at some of the good data that out of China, the mortality rate was like 15% if you were above 80. So when they're quoting, generally speaking, 2 or 3%, I do think that number is probably not accurate because we're not testing a lot of people. There's asymptomatic people with COVID walking around. I think I've said that 5 times. I'll probably say it 5 times more. So we don't know the numbers yet, but at least from the numbers we know, if we say it's 2 or 3%, 15% roughly, if you're above 80 and get it. And then there was like a 0.2% risk from 30 to 59. So, and those people had some underlying conditions. So hypertension, asthma, diabetes, things like that. The one thing, and I just saw this study today, that so children do seem to be not affected. Even some kids and some adults, for that matter, are testing positive who don't have fever and just have cold symptoms. So that's unique. We still have to pan that out. But infants are a different story. So infants have a little bit more. That was the very first time I read it was today, that infants have a little bit more predilection to get COVID. Not bad outcomes necessarily. I don't think there's enough numbers to really know that. But there's a little mini blip with infants having a little bit more infection rate than babies, children, toddlers, young people. So, and that makes a little bit more sense. I mean, very, immature immunity and being more susceptible to anything, just like flu or colds or bacteria.
Hey, question about antibacterial wipes. So A, are they helpful? B, one person asked, her parents are older, 83 and 87 years old. If her sister buys groceries for them, should she wipe down frozen goods, boxed foods with antibacterial wipes?
It's probably not a bad idea.
And
I don't think you could do that I don't think grocery stores should be doing that. But if you're going to a grocery store to buy groceries for elderly grandparents or parents, it doesn't take you very long to wipe that stuff down. Just wipe it down. Pretty easy. And by the way, as far as ideas, what you can do when you're home with your kids. So you got the puzzles and you got the games, you're doing all that stuff, but this is a neat opportunity. We were talking about this the other day about when crises like this happen, it actually brings up the best in people. It always does. And it will be really, there's no silver lining to this necessarily. It's a bad. bad thing that's happening. But one thing that we'll see that's a positive that comes out of it is how much we really figure out we need each other, which is amazing. We already knew it, but we really didn't know it and feel it until this kind of stuff happens. So we can't do things by ourselves. It takes a village all the time. And I touch my face a ton. I apologize. I'm just giving you an example.
What not?
Maybe this, I don't even know what I've been here, but how many times I've touched my face and I try not to. Imagine how, maybe you guys don't touch your face as often as I do. But what a neat opportunity for your kids to see the parents saying, you know what we're gonna do? There is an elderly couple that lives across the street. You know they're here, but they're isolated now. They're probably afraid to go outside. They got to get groceries. Do they need to go get groceries? No, we can go over. If you don't want to go into the house and to risk infecting them, you can write them a note. In fact, we kind of forgot how to write notes. And maybe grandma and grandpa, who you haven't talked to in a long time, they might deserve a little Skype. They're probably worried at home. They love to see the kids. They love to see any human being. Just that we don't need to talk about coronavirus. We can just talk about your day and how you're feeling and all of that. But that's a neat opportunity because in our neighborhoods, there are all elderly people that might not have anybody available to help them. And an easy thing to do is to go shopping for them. Easy. They don't got to expose themselves to a grocery store. You can go get groceries for them, make them feel loved. It's so great. We don't even say you don't got to go into their house and disinfect it if you don't want to. Another cool thing you could do, but that's asking a lot. But there's no risk for you if you're already going out to the grocery store to pick up extra stuff. I just thought about that. I guess we should do that. That's a cool thing to do. What else is that?
Yeah. So what about building defenses? High doses of vitamin C, D, and A, garlic and chicken broth, sleep. She was just wondering what she can do to have a force field around her kids.
So we just had this discussion with the man
we did.
At a restaurant the other day that he loves vitamin C.
High doses.
Yeah, Linus Pauling, 70s from Stanford. He's a smart guy. I would not put all my trust in vitamin C and D and E and all of that. I don't think those are bad things for you. Use them in moderation. I don't think they're going to protect you from coronavirus. What will protect you from coronavirus is keeping your self healthy. Sleep is a good one. So I would make sure you're getting adequate rest. Your mental health is a lot to do with this too. So if you do need to go for a walk outside, which there's no limitation to that, getting sunlight and doing a little bit of some breathing exercise, walk a labyrinth if you have one, meditate, whatever you're into, that kind of mental health will help your physical health. So sleep, drinking water, your chicken broth, all that stuff, do that stuff. That never hurts you. We certainly know if your body is not in a good space. We've already talked about that medically fragile people get this disease worse. So that doesn't have to mean that I have asthma, I have hypertension, I have diabetes. It can mean that I haven't slept well in 5 days, and you'd be just as likely to get a bad cold and bad strep and bad influenza if you weren't taking care of yourself. So if that whole list that person gave, sleep's better. Easier said than done, but sleep.
One question about, I think you answered this, but she said, if there's a fever, what's the best way to handle the fever? Is it call your pediatrician, give Advil, Tylenol? At what temp would you?
She said, yeah, is there fever? What's the best way to handle the fever? I'll read it for you guys, sorry. If parents have a kiddo at home with flu-like symptoms, I understand they are to keep the patient isolated from others and watch for respiratory distress. If there's a fever, what is the best way to handle the fever? Burn the germ and allow the body temp to be elevated to fight the bug, or is it best to lower the fever, Tylenol, Motrin? And what temp would you administer these? So I usually recommend that a fever is your body's natural defense against bugs, bacteria and virus. So, but fevers are also problematic. Fevers make kids, especially because their tanks are little. They don't have big tanks like us. So they are much more susceptible to dehydration and to other things like that. So if a kiddo has 102 and 103 fever, you should treat that fever with Tylenol and Motrin because they're not going to eat. They're going to be fussy. They're not going to sleep. So that already makes them more susceptible to worse illness. So treat that. But if you have a temperature, like a high temperature, like you're 100, If the kiddo's not miserable, not complaining of pain, just kind of, and we're 100, you can let that go. If you want to burn the germ, I never heard that term before. That makes sense. If you want to burn the germ, see what happens, and then kind of monitor the temperature to see if it goes higher. But in our rule, a fever is anything above 100.5. So anything above 100.5, you're kind of getting into that higher range where maybe that risk benefit of letting that burn the germ work is not worth it. So then I probably would do Tylenol and Motrin, or Motrin, not the same time, and see what comes of that. So yeah, I do believe my father-in-law is a family medicine doc, and he was a big burn the germ guy. He really liked that, and I love him. He's really smart. He's smarter than me, but he might even agree in this case. Don't let the fever get too high.
Yeah.
And again, and he was a family medicine doc. I'm sure he gave different advice to adults than he did to kids. Kids, again, just remember them. They're not little adults at all. You can't just extrapolate all this adult data into little kids. It's not how it works. So if they are miserable, now if the kid's miserable and he's 100.3, I don't think I would take that literally and say, because there's error in those measurements all the time. So if he's miserable and he looks, and mom and dad's touches are as valuable as anything else. I always say the mommy fever, if you're like, you are burning up. And if that temperature reads 99, that's wrong. Moms usually know their kids more than anybody else, and dads. So if that baby is burning up, your 2-year-old, treat it. And then the important thing is, does it go down? Did Motrin and Tylenol work? If Motrin and Tylenol did not work, that needs to be addressed, because those kids could have a ton of other things going on, not just coronavirus, because all those other viruses we talk about every wintertime did not go away. They're still here. And it's again, like I said before, my personal concern is that we're going to miss those kids.
Okay, so be thinking of your last closing thoughts, because we need to wrap up here in a second. And as Brandon is thinking about the last wise word he wants to leave us with,
pressure.
No pressure. To piggyback on what Brand was saying, many of y'all know one of my passions is to really create spaces and to inspire and encourage us to really dig deep and grow our roots deep as human beings. But in this context, talking about how to respond to this crisis of coronavirus and the fear and the worry and the overwhelm and the disruption that so many of us are having. Paychecks are different and our rhythms are different, and there's just so much unknown. I have a link in the write-up to a 40-day, 10-minute place of pause, POP, that I'm doing every day at 9 a.m. Denver time, Mountain Time. And if you can't get on, hop onto the replay. And if you can't do that, just my personal hope is, and encouragement is to find a moment that you can really commit to in these seasons of disrupted rhythm times to fill your tank up. Brandon used that tank analogy. Your spirit, your body, your mind, to, a moment to love on the person that you live with, and really grow those roots so that we can sustain whatever is coming our way. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because Brandon, probably every day since this crisis hit, he has mentioned something to the effect that he said just now, of how he just has this sense and this hope that this crisis is really gonna create a deeper awareness of our need for each other. Right. And how, and we as parents, and I know there are people watching that aren't parents, we as neighbors and friends and family members, how can we really loop safely and without fear, care for each other, and grow those roots of community deep in our own soul care. So that closing last word that you want to share with folks, what do you got?
I didn't think I was going to say this, but I was just thinking about, I went to the bank today because I was afraid the banks would be closed eventually. And two of the tellers there were, I didn't tell you this yet, were arguing about the COVID-19. And one was so surprised this lady wasn't worried about it. And she was so surprised that she was worried about it. And why is she being so anxious and all this? And I think a good reminder is we need to be kind to people that don't have the same opinion, or if they aren't as escalated or as fearful as you may be, or if one person is too escalated or too fearful in your opinion, be kind to them. They have all their other stuff that was going on before this that we don't know about. And so this is now just one more thing, and it's a lot. So everybody has their own story. But I think we need to respect people's differences on it. And certainly this isn't a thing to debate about, well, I think you need to be more worried about it. But they are just do what you need to do for you and your family and be the model and be an example. But they weren't being very kind to each other. We don't need to be nice and kind of different. Nice is sometimes a bad word in our house. I mean, powerful and prepared, kind of, we like those better. But I do think being kind and patient, and sometimes, letting people, if they need to vent a little bit about their frustrations, listen. This is better just not say anything, and just listen and let them do it. Because remember, they did have a lot of stuff. We all do before this happened. And this might just that one thing that puts them over the edge. So those friends you were worried about, like 2 or 3 months ago before this happened, if you haven't called them or wrote them a letter, maybe this is the time to do it. Again, those grandparents, those people in your neighborhood that we were talking about, this is the time to do it, especially the elderly, because they already feel that they are isolated, even more so now, maybe even forgotten. So they still need, it's going to start snowing. They still need their sidewalks shoveled. They still need to get around. They might have doctor's appointments they need to go to, but they're afraid to get in a bus because we can't do mass transit. Maybe you can drive them, and even just ask what they need. If you just ask, they'll feel like they're wanted and cared for. So that's just fun. A little bit more than that.
Beautiful.
Really?
That's awesome.
She's easy.
I'm a fan. So you guys, we love you. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for taking time to share your mind, your heart, that wise, beautiful word at the end. If my mom was watching, she'd be like, that Brandon.
She better be watching.
He's a pediatrician and
She better be watching.
Yeah.
Jen, are you out there?
But listen, we want to have the last word be, to those of you that are afraid, that are feeling alone, please post below how we can be loving on you, what you need. Let's use this wildly beautiful online platform to be able to share what's going on with each of us, and keep the questions coming. I'll pass them on to B-Dog. And
if I don't know, I'll find someone that knows.
He knows way more than what he's saying, by the way. He is, pretty brilliant.
She's biased.
So keep the conversation going. Don't go it alone. You are loved. You belong. And may we use our gifts, as Brandon is modeling today, to share some love, make peace and truth grow, and go it together more and more in the days to come. Love you guys so much. Let's stand tall together and light up the world. Peace. Bye.